I anyway.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, looking forward to it.
For some reason, I didn't realize that you were part of the organizing team.
We'll wait another minute or so and see if we get some additional people joining us. Then we'll get started.
I'm just gonna try sharing my screen and see if it works. That's fine.
It would be better to wait because we're
Okay.
already recording.
Okay.
So welcome everyone to the third in our webinar series on food systems and AI. We have with us today Dr. Kushank Bajaj with the Food and Agriculture Organization. This is the third of four, and if you are interested in the rest of the webinars, you can find our information at our website on cias.wisc.edu, or you can go to the Icicle website as well, icicle.osu.edu. A little bit about Kushank, I wanted to share with you. He reached out to me based on some other work that I'd done, and I was thrilled to have a chance to learn more about the work that he does and thought others might be interested too. He's a data scientist. He currently works at FAO and earned his PhD from University of British Columbia. At the heart of his work is a commitment to making research and data more accessible, actionable, and relevant to those who need it most. He's especially drawn to projects that are people and policy centered, and believes that meaningful solutions to complex social problems emerge through collaboration, trust, and transdisciplinary thinking. Yeah, I think he's on the same wavelength as our UW-Madison team on this. He cares deeply about bridging the gap between research and practice, going beyond academic papers and technical reports to communicate insights that resonate with policymakers, communities, and anyone who wants to build a more just and sustainable world. With that, Kushank, would you like to share your screen and we can move on?
Sure. Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate that introduction. Um, I guess everybody can see my screen. Perfect. So I'll sort of present for about 45 minutes, and I'll speak to two projects that I did before joining FAO. So I'm not presenting the work as part. I'm not presenting as part of an of FAO organization. Um, and these two projects basically what they do. Is this beep? There's a lot of beeping. I think that's participants coming in.
Yes, that's people joining the call.
Okay. So both these projects sort of focus on making food flows or information about how and where food comes from more visible and actionable. In the real world, this is an extremely challenging problem because of most high fidelity data on supply chains is either proprietary or is owned by private organizations. It's a little bit can be easier in places like the US where the data infrastructure, government infrastructure is so strong, but it becomes a lot more challenging when you start thinking about this problem from a global perspective or places like even Canada, which has very limited data. So the first project I want to sort of talk about, it was part of my PhD research at University of British Columbia. I was supervised by Naveen Ramankuti and had the pleasure of working with some of the most humble and lovely people out there in this academic world. At least that's what I found. So what we did in my PhD work was we developed what we are calling Canada Food Flows. It's a data product and knowledge mobilization tool that traces how fruits and vegetables move from domestic and international sources to Canadian provinces. and also over time. And we basically use this data product to showcase the systemic or cross-border climate risks embedded in these supply chains for Canada. But why fruits and vegetables? First of all, fruits and vegetables are an essential part of healthy diets. The Canada Food Guide and also all our grandmothers always recommend that you need to eat at least half your plate needs to be fruits and vegetables, excluding potatoes and starch. Despite this well-known fact, in Canada, about 70 to 80% of Canadians don't meet the recommended intake diets. And when people conducted some surveys to find out why, what are the barriers to fruit and vegetable consumption, one of the major factors came out was prices. So there was a clear gap between dietary recommendations and the reality, with implications not just for the food systems, but also for the public health sector. Second, there's also fruits and vegetables are often overlooked in policy discussions. They're never top of mind issues when people are talking about food, trade, supply chains, and risks. I was at a consultation in my early PhD years in Ottawa, where the whole topic was how Canada is going to sustainably feed the world. It focused heavily on cereals, beef, pork, but there was barely any mention of fruits and vegetables. And this is seriously problematic for Canada because despite being a net exporter of food, it is highly import dependent on fruits and vegetables for fruits and vegetables. About 80% of all fruits consumed by Canadians are imported, and 60% of vegetables are also imported. The import dependence is never the biggest problem. It's more so how concentrated the supply chains are. So we wanted to basically understand what the lack of diversity in supply chains means to prices and climate risks for Canadians in their supply chain. It creates problems not just internationally, but also domestic shocks. Make concentrated or lack of diversity in supply chain creates problems when there are domestic shocks, like the 2021 atmospheric river that happened in British Columbia and disrupted the major highway, basically blocking British Columbia with rest of Canada. Similarly, when there's cross-border shocks like droughts in California's Central Valley, this has serious implications for Canadians in fruit and vegetables. And of course, there's, as we all very well know, the trade policy issues as well. With highly concentrated supply chains, such shocks can impact availability of fruits and vegetables in Canada, but also prices at the same time. So what we did was we wanted to understand these things with a more nuanced lens. We needed better access to data. And we tried to do that by developing Canada Food Flows, which is a provincial scale data. It People can basically map and identify where different fruits and vegetables come from, disaggregated by US states and every other country in the world. So if someone were to click on British Columbia, they can identify where their lettuce is coming from and how that's changed over time. So what is how diversified that supply chain has been in the past, or that has is being changing more recently. I won't go super deep into the methods of this, but if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And I have some extra slides to show you how we did this. Again, the challenge here was lack of public data to do this. We basically used provincial level production data, bilateral trade data, which was already at disaggregated by US states. But often this data basically tells you where food is coming into Canada, but it's not usually consumed in that province. So there could be bananas coming almost 80% of total, say, Canada's banana consumption comes to the port of Vancouver, but it's not consumed in that province. So we had to then resolve the issue of interprovincial flows, which hadn't been done at commodity level before. So this is where then we had to get a little bit more innovative. We didn't have Canada freight data that US has, so we had to be making assumptions, running optimization models, and then trying to figure out, do these assumptions make sense or not? So the map here shows you an aggregated, what we found, aggregated flows. The blue shows aggregated fruits, and orange, you can see aggregated vegetables. And the thickness of the line shows the total quantities of these food groups coming from different parts of the world into Canadian provinces. But the advantage of this was it was commodity level. So we could also break it down by specific commodities and not just look at aggregated fruits and vegetables. This animation here shows the supply of avocado coming into British Columbia, and you can see how that changed over time. You can see how Mexico becomes the dominant supplier of avocados now, more recently. But in 2010, it was quite different. Mexico is represented as MX, and you can see early in 20, say, 10, 2011, there was still avocados coming from California and Peru, which then completely was moved. This is the sort of advantage of looking at supply chains of food flows over time. We also developed an open access platform called foodflows.ca, where you can open source access, you can access the data, you can visualize it, you can select any fruit and vegetable, and it'll show you the flows in a dynamic, interactive way. You can see how those have changed over time. You can also hover over any of these flows, and it'll give you some insights on what the food flows look like. And when you click on any of these flows, it then gives you a bunch of more details on like using graphs and stuff. Um, But to showcase how this data can also be used to assess cross-border climate risks, as part of my PhD work, what we did was we took this Canada food flows data and basically assessed historic weather shocks in agriculture regions across the world during growing seasons. And then we used a novel, innovative approach called superposed epoch analysis, which is basically used in atmospheric science, and it's not a fancy economics approach. And looked at how every time, on average, there was, say, heat stress in Canada's major supplying regions, what the impact was on prices in Canadian cities. So here, just I'm just giving you two, three examples. You can see what we found was on average, every time there was a heat stress event, lettuce prices increased by about 35%, cauliflower prices increased by 29%, and apple prices decreased by 18%. Well, this is again just a first like attempt at assessing this from a cross-border perspective, utilizing Canada food flows data. And we can talk more about why the prices decrease of apples, but I don't want to go super deep into that right now. Having quantified the impact of historical weather shocks on prices, we took a leap and assessed what the exposure looks like of these weather extremes on current Canada's fruit and vegetable supply. So we basically used CMAP6 downscaled and bias corrected data, which was terabytes of data, multimodal assessment, and then assessed weather extremes, calculated different weather extremes across the world. Combining that with the Canada food flows, we were able to identify what the exposure looks like in major supplying regions. For example, we found exposure to extreme heat is quite significant in Brazil and Pacific Southwest and Mexico. And these are the regions that Canada depends on for over 50% of all these fruits and vegetables listed at the bottom of the slide here. But why build these data sets, right? And how are these being used? To just give you some real world applications of how this was used in the last couple of years. When Trump threatened tariffs, of course, there are all CUSMA and other policies that doesn't fruits and vegetables are included in, so it's tax free, then they can't put tariffs on it. But there was a threat of it, and markets react to those kind of shocks and threats. Um, Coincidentally, we ended up launching the data product, the tool, right at the same time when the whole tariff debate was happening. So it got picked up a lot by news media across Canada and internationally, where people wanted to understand what their exposure was and how much do we rely on the US for our food. It also had implications um, on making people more aware of regional supply chains versus global supply chains. It's been picked up in classes in like both grad programs and undergrads where people are using it as a tool to educate people. Some of the climate impact work on prices was also picked up by some of the news media that is read by policymakers a lot. But then there was two more interesting use cases that I wanted to just show and just to give a sense of why it's important to build these kind of data sets and how it can be used or is being used. We found out that BC Trucking Association, BC British Columbia, was using this data to advocate for not putting any retaliatory tariffs on the US. So it was being used, it was in policy circles, being used in that way. It was also being used and currently being used with food banks to assess. This is taking the data and doing another couple of steps onto it to assess surplus in any province in Canada. Often, food banks end up procuring a lot of food that they give out through either large grocery stores that reject the produce, but now they're also finding out that they can procure food from farmers themselves because there are some tax credits for it. And that food is usually lost after farm gate, basically, either due to cosmetic issues or they've overproduced. So now food banks are trying to get a sense of what is the scalability of their operations. I'm not like recommending that food banks is a solution to something, but just saying that it can be used in that particular way as well. Um, okay, so I'm going to slow down. I think I'm going really fast. Um, so shifting gears a bit from my PhD work to my post PhD work. This is the second project I worked on, which is an open initiative for modeling and stress testing global food systems. So this is when wanted to see what kind of data is out there. How can we build a digital twin, at least a prototype of it, at a global scale? This was a collective effort. I was part of the team. It was led by Better Planet Laboratory, Zia Merabi at the University of Colorado Boulder, and Jasper from Delft University, and Cameron from Earth Genome. It is probably one of the most ambitious projects I have undertaken till now. It definitely broke my brain so many times thinking about scaling. When you start working at that scale, of using 200 cores of computational running optimization models, things break down more than you think it would. Um, Let me begin by just describing what we mean by digital twins here. I wouldn't say it's become a buzzword yet, but I feel like people throw digital twins a lot all the time now because it has real world implications. It's basically a dynamic virtual replica of a real world system. Now you can have a real world system which is at microscopic level or at a farm level, but you can also have a real world system that is global in nature, like the food supply chain. So these are data-driven replicas of real-world systems that mirrors the state and behavior of a physical system. It can be food supply chains, could be energy grids and ecosystems. It's not a new term. People have been working on this for a long time. We just started thinking about that from a supply of food or agri-food systems perspective. Um, so why digital twins matter for food systems? There are a number of opportunities that food twin can unlock for our food systems. First of all, it can enable proactive policies and food crisis management. They allow us to link production, trade flows, transportation networks, and consumption patterns into one unified model. Once this is in place, one can run shock simulations. For example, what happens to wheat availability if a major exporting country faces drought? Or what happens to port disruptions, or what's happening currently with Strait of Hormuz? Uh, who is going to get impacted? What are the cascading effects of these blockades? Can be assessed in a more rapid and evidence policy response can be created if we have a digital twin where you can do such scenarios like that. Second major benefit is that it breaks out of silos. We have quite advanced approaches to estimate or map where food is produced right now. We have really advanced techniques to assess the impact of shocks on those crop yields or those cropping regions. And then we also have really advanced models that optimize supply chains. And I'm sure a lot of people in this group have been working on demand models as well to assess where the consumer demand is changing and how that's happening. So a digital twin could offer us to connect all these different siloed approaches into one unified system, as I mentioned before. Third benefit, and probably the most important benefit in my opinion, is the equity and transparency part. Much of the world's food systems knowledge sits in private sector data platforms, or like it's impossible to get that information. Here in Canada, majority of the food that goes through to the ports or through from the grain silos, elevators, none of that information is publicly available. So, and it's even bigger of a problem in low middle income countries that don't have that level of data infrastructure to gather that information. So, can we create a global twin where that information is transparent, that it's not under only high income country politicians or private companies to make a profit out of? Before going global, this work actually started as a US prototype as a proof of concept. The idea was simple, basically, what would a food systems digital twin actually look like in practice? Here, there's an animation of the app, which is online. Anybody can access it. And it shows different views. It shows a producer view, consumer view, and how all of that information was linked together through supply chain data. This is at a county level for the US and includes all major food groups. Here, you can see a producer view of that data tool, where you can see oranges flowing from Florida to rest of the US. The number and the speed of the particles show are calibrated to the volume. So more particles or faster the particles are moving show that more volume is moving to those counties from Florida. There is a part of a consumer view as well in that app where you can click on a region, say a county in Texas, and see where the food comes from into this county. Again, this is most likely routes or food sources of food. It's not validated that this is definitely where it comes from. And we can also overlay different stressors on top of this then. In this, I think heat stress has been overlaid, and then you can see they try to link a crop yield model as well. So the impact of heat stress, the actual heat stress that you're seeing on the map, is on production of different crops. and then link at how much supply could reduce to a particular region if that stressor goes on. Again, not real time at this stage, but that is the goal, to go real time. So scaling from a US level to a global prototype was also a big leap. We expanded to include 3,700 subnational units internationally. We incorporated a multi-modality international trade model, transportation model, which was built on all the data out there on OSM, which is OpenStreetMap, and did this for 82 different food commodities, including crops, livestock, and fisheries. Just to give you a sense of how we did this, there were different components of this model. One was a production model where using multiple data source sets like crop grids from FAO, livestock densities, and global fisheries data, we were able to identify where, say, in a particular year, this was all normalized for 2020, where food is being produced, where the 83 commodities, 82 commodities are being produced in the world. We did this not just for quantities of food, but also calories and micro and macronutrients. Then we assessed the consumption side of the model, where we used quite a simplistic approach at this first prototype level. We basically, from food balance sheet data, we knew how much of every commodity is consumed in a particular country. Using a population data model, we disallocated or downscaled consumption to subnational units using population data. The third and the major component or the most complex part of this puzzle was the trade and the transportation model, where we wanted to then connect the 3,700 subnational regions globally. We know what is produced in these 3,700 places in the world, and we know how much demand is of food in these 3,700 subnational units. We wanted to do it through maritime and land-based trade networks. Just to give you a little bit more context on how that was done, we used data produced by Jasper at Tufts University, which is a multimodality transportation model, and then ran multiple optimizations at commodity level and per country basis using that as the base layer. So what this does is for, say, any international export or trade that happens through maritime route, it basically identifies what's the least cost path including the hinterland component. So from, say, a centroid of California to the port of Los Angeles, and then from Los Angeles to the port of Vancouver in Canada, and then from Vancouver to the hinterland land-based transportation network. So it basically uses both all road, rail, inland waterways, and maritime shipping to assess the least cost paths. This resulted in 13 million unique flows across 82 food groups and different types of flows. We also did this for within the country as well. Uh, so how much food does moves from within, say, one province in Canada to the other? This animation basically shows part of the interface and what it looks like. You can, again, it's open source, anybody can use it. It's called foodtwin .plotline.org. You can click on any subnational unit, and it's going to give you some statistics on what is produced in that region, what the agriculture GDP looks like, how it's broken down by food groups. And as you scroll down, it shows you who is being fed from this state. So including the transportation routes. It also, in the end, gives you how many people would be impacted if this just basically a number of people connected in an absolute terms, but also in food terms. So considering what the minimum caloric requirement is in a particular region. It assesses the total number of people fed by a particular subnational region. So when we did this, our main goal was to develop a front end tool as a prototype. Um, but then when we did the entire data side of work, we found that the data was the way we did it. There was a lot more high fidelity in the data that we couldn't showcase in an app. So what we did, and this is a paper which is upcoming, it's still in the works, it's not been published yet. Uh, what we did was we aggregated those 13 million flows by different transportation infrastructure. So we could identify that how much of food is being flows from any particular infrastructure in the world. It could be Strait of Hormuz, it could be Highway 1 in Canada, or one of the major highways in the US. So what we found, again, not published work, and just take it with a grain of salt. What we found was that roughly 9% of transportation infrastructure carries 80% of all food calories in the world. Here is a map that shows the 80% of food calories, and the more brighter the color, the more important that transportation infrastructure is to our global food supply. We were also able to do this for subnational units and identifying what are the most important subnational units, states, provinces in the world that feed most of the people in the world. Again, the same story. It's highly concentrated. There are only few critical regions in the world producing most of the food. There's also few critical transportation infrastructure corridors or highways that move this food from producing regions to the final consuming regions. This concentration story also holds for for micronutrients. The figure that I showed here was calories, proteins, and macronutrients. The same thing happens with micronutrients. So you can see how iron, vitamin A supply chains are also concentrated. So disruptions to any key route doesn't just have impacts on caloric intake, but can also have impact on have major nutritional implications as well. Um, we then did the same thing by food group. And this was really interesting to me, at least. You can see how critical infrastructure varies by food group. And some of these nuances make sense, right? You have vegetables, you don't see any international transportation come up in vegetables. The most critical infrastructure moving vegetables are within the country or within the continent. But when you see, say, cereals or grains, you can see all that international transportation, maritime infrastructure light up. We did the same thing to then look at what are the key or critical transportation infrastructure feeding low-income countries versus high-income regions. And what we found was that high-income regions rely on smaller share of infrastructure for supply. Lower income regions depend on a larger share of infrastructure. So and you can see the difference in the key transportation corridors or maritime routes that are critical for supply chain or food supply. So this is very much a proof of concept, the global food twin work. We have a long way to go, but this was done to showcase that it is possible to do it at a global scale. There's still a lot of validation that can be done, that needs to be done. Um, there's a lot of next steps that we've planned, and there's a lot of work going on that as well, where we want to add features for shocks and propagation. So you can overlay different shocks, or you can simulate a particular shock in the supply chain, the high fidelity data that we produced, and then see who might be impacted. There's also stakeholder engagement. We hope that a tool like this can start a conversation, either in the policy circles or in other places where there can be more data shared, and then you can start getting more information on processing facilities, grain bins, stocks, which is a major problem in agri-food systems right now. It's a national security issue, but it is a major buffer in how shocks propagate. But we have very little understanding of stocks of different fruits and vegetables, of food in general in the world. We also want to try and improve the temporal resolution. This was done for a particular year using annual data. We want to see if we can make it higher temporal resolution and over time. And then there's been a move towards developing these for specific regions or countries where it's more of a demand-driven approach, where we want to work with the governments and people to be ask them how and what would be useful um, in terms of a food twin. And those needs can be very different, and the infrastructure that you build, the data or the tool, could look very differently based on who the user is and how they want to use it. And then, as I said, that would want to do like policy simulations as well to test scenarios, interventions, real world implications of some of these shocks and the use case of this. Well, I think I really sped through. I think it's 35 minutes. But I have some extra slides as well. If you have any questions, it'll be really good to have a discussion rather than just me presenting the whole time. So I'm more than happy to start that conversation. And if you have any questions, more than happy to take them. And
Thank you, Kushank. That was really interesting, and the maps flashed by so quickly. I was having a hard time watching and writing at the same time. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I see two in the chat. The first one was, what are your data sources for the Food Twin project?
yeah, that's great. So this is great. It's great. Way better to have a discussion than me like telling you everything in the presentation. So for the global food twin, what we used was mostly FAO data. So the production layers, we had the production data coming from FAO stat. And then what we did was we had the crop crates coming from FAO, which is basically high resolution maps of where different commodities are grown in the world. We had livestock data coming from the GLEM model, which gives you some densities and where these different livestocks are. And then the global fisheries data. That was on the production side of the model. Consumption side, we used food balance sheets. This basically tells you in a particular country how much of every food group or food commodity is consumed per capita or in total. And then we also used international trade data, which I believe came from, also came from FAO stat. FAO stat. But there were some things we had to work around, right? One is transshipments or re-exports. So what happens is not all food produced a commodity can get say processed in another particular country where it was imported. Say soy coming from Brazil gets imported exported to Netherlands where it's processed into soy cake and then is shipped again as a feed for something, and then that commodity is shipped again. So we had to like work around those and try and estimate what is the re-export spot. um, yeah, if there's any specific data sources you want me to mention or specific parts of the model, I'm more than happy to. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
follow-up question just for clarification. How does
sure.
that like how does that compare to like the USDA GATS data and like what are I guess which indicators were you using from the FAO stats and where's that like how is that data being collected from the FAO stats in particular? Because I'm wondering
So
if it's
we
like the most updated and all that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, for us, like FAO stat has become like the go-to, right? Because when you're doing anything global, you need data like that's global. It's usually self-reported by countries. There's a long history of how data is collected at FAO and FAO stat. So it's mostly like my understanding is it's self-reported data on what the countries are sharing with the UN. Um, yeah, I don't know how it compares with the USDA data, but which part of the data you're saying? Because USDA also has lots of different data sets. Um,
Yeah, the GATS is the importing and the exporting. That's why I was wondering.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, this is basically FAO what they do with so you're basically the trade data. They I think build on the Comtrade data is my understanding, but they do some more cleaning of that data and then put it on their FAO stat data portal. It's slightly different from UN Comtrade, but it is the UN data that goes into that.
Lauren, you have a question?
I do. It builds directly off the first question. So thanks, Noreen, for setting that up. Hi, this was fascinating. I'm at Oregon State University and I'm an extension, but I have lots of colleagues who are trying to teach about this. So this will be very useful for them. My question is, given the data sets, what analysis in your experience in talking to sort of practitioners who are interested in the now and maybe the recent, but then the next, what sort of scale of question do you feel that these models are best at answering? So I was looking through and I'm like, okay, what does it say about Oregon? And oh, what does it say about Washington? What does it say about Idaho? Do you think that comparisons of, state to state, like how useful are those, or is it like just go by gigaton to gigaton, like how fine grained should we get versus how does this state compare to our country versus this really rich, export import type story that you're telling? Because the people that we work with, I would send them this and they'd click on it and say, I'm not sure that represents the Oregon I know, but that may not be
Mm-hmm.
the point. So I
Mm-hmm.
really am curious, especially since you were talking about its value for policy, and often policy should be made based on long-term stuff, but often policy is made based on some horrible thing that just happened or might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so people want to have it seems useful to have really up to the minute data and be making decisions for now and future instead of decisions based on how it was 3 to 5 years ago. So I have no answer. I'm asking what you think about those types of questions.
Lauren, that's a really tough question. Um,
She's good at those.
uh, I think that, see, again, the value doing it global, you'll always, when you see anything, any global product, and try and get insights for a small or a specific region, there's always going to be issues with it. Like, it's impossible because your goal is to, like, in this, we use the food twin to come up with some estimates on how much food is moving from Strait of Hormuz. So it was able to give us some ballpark estimate. So for that global level thing, it can be a good sort of first place to get like some sense. I totally agree. Policies are not made globally, and mostly you need specific context and a particular region that they look at. And this is where we're trying to promote and focus more on regional food twins. So can we build something that's specific? And we try to do this for BC or trying to put in some application for that, some funding application, where we want to make it not like some academics sitting or in their labs and building something, right? Like we want to build it with people who have data on elevators and they're going to use it, or policymakers trying to understand that particular context and build it for that specific region. So this, in my personal opinion, it's useful at a global scale to get some insights, but for specific decision making on the ground for a specific province or state, I would think we need more nuanced data, more high fidelity data, which again is easy to do in the US. I found it really hard to do it in other places. Even the Canada food flows that we had to make in for fruits and vegetable for my PhD work, we had so much trouble. Like there's no information on commodity level consumption in provinces. All you have is specific aggregates of how much food is consumed in a particular thing. So we had to reach out to the federal government to request data. They have some information, proprietary data. So we were able to get scanner level data, grocery store data, like a coarse indicator. So we could then split and understand what the consumption, how consumption varies across provinces. I don't know if I'm answering your question,
No,
but
you are. This is, I really was asking you to reflect on like, what can we do with it? Because I do think this is an amazing tool. And as you talk about it, I think like the thing for Oregon might be to think about how does our state interact with the global food economy? What do the data actually tell us about, how much of our food and what types of food? Because, Washington and Oregon may both be in the Pacific Northwest, but we have some disadvantages in terms of location of ports and things like that. And so I think it's really useful for thinking about those types of questions too. So I appreciate that. And I think my only other thing would be when I go on your website, and I would love a way to just know a little bit more about the general dates that the data represent and maybe the sources if you're able, just because it might help somebody engage with it a little bit more. But I think it's an awesome
okay.
tool.
No, thanks. Which tool are you referring to on the data?
I'm on your food twin, theplotline.org.
Okay, the global
But
one.
but
So
Michelle said we used to gave us a lot, so we all have to wander around in them a lot afterwards. So thank you for this work.
thank you. There's also a blog post and like all repositories, how we did this, the data, the input data, the output data, the model outputs, everything's open source. So I'll send you a link to where we describe the methodology along with data sets and all that. But we've made everything open source. We're not holding back on any data in both outputs and inputs. So yeah.
We have another question in the chat. How do you envision the validation process of certain stress, say climate or blockades at key ports? Are there hindcasting opportunities to test the models?
Uh, Great question. Thanks for that. Again, I think the one way to do it is look at the historical shocks, simulate that in the model, and see how the data, can you validate it? Does it make sense? It is, I would think it is possible. Some things like, let me give you an example of this avocado supply chain. So there was, I think, a few years ago, there was some issues in Mexico, and then the supply chain really altered. And a lot of avocados used to come from Mexico, and things started shifting right away. So if you were to like simulate that shock in the model and be like, okay, what happens if Mexico's supply reduces by this? What is the most likely supplying source of avocados to British Columbia? And then we can try and validate it. Some of the global food chain and transportation data, let me pull it up. This. We tried to validate some of this, and what we did was, again, there's very little information open source on this stuff. Some countries do report port level data. So how much is moving US does, how much of every commodity is moving from one port into the country or outside of the country. Again, this one would think is very easy because border control agencies should have this data. Every country does. They monitor their borders very well, but it's not open source. We found it for a handful of countries. And often it's either aggregated or rarely it's like commodity level that then you can validate the is your optimization working well or not. That's one way to do it, which we tried. The other is through these presentations and getting feedback from different stakeholders. I think in the US twin, there's some questions came up that in even in the global twin, one model we ran, one section of it, the model didn't take the Mississippi going down. What it did was it took the highway and the road right next to the Mississippi following the exact same path, which was just like some costing function that had to be shifted for a particular thing. So now we're doing commodity perishability level model runs of this so that we say that, okay, if it's grain, yeah, we don't care about time. We care about cost, reduce the cost. But if it's perishable produce, no, take the fastest route. So those little nuances, I think, is more iterative. You build it, get it out, get feedback, and then validate some of those things and redo it.
Another question in the chat. Song asked, what are the major constraints or factors for the routing in your heat stress example, distance and cost? And that kind of relates to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, the heat stress example for the US twin was basically cost. So the rerouting, I don't think there was a real-time rerouting that happened. It basically shows how much quantity reduces, if I remember correctly. It basically shows, okay, how much loss there is on production. And the transportation paths were optimized before using least cost paths. But this was again an early prototype and only used road networks. But ideally, that would be really good, right? Like if you know, then you rerun a full optimization again, say this is less, and then which counties are going to be able to source this food and how that's going to redistribute. Uh, that would be really good to do in real time. But again, for country context, probably more practical to do it. For global context, it's a lot harder to do. Uh, like just to give you a sense of this global food twin, we did all this optimization work on AWS, and we were running models for almost 10 hours on a machine which has 200 gigabytes of RAM. Um, and then it's not just optimization, then it's post-processing and getting to actual line strings that just the data becomes harder and harder to manage. So if you were to run it for a specific region, it might be possible to do that real-time optimization and redistribution of supply chains.
Kushank, I wanted to ask a question about concentration in the food system. And, usually what we're talking about in concentration, we're thinking about the ends of the supply chain, the consumption and the production pieces of it, but there's also been concentration in the middle part. And in preparation for speaking to the National Rural Grocers Summit in a couple weeks, I started digging into some of the issues that distributors are facing in the way the system is organized. And back in the well, starting in the 1890s, at least in the United States, there was a lot of effort to try to prevent that concentration through antitrust legislation. And then it was kind of re-upped again in the 30s, both through the Robinson-Patman Act that protected rural and regional retailers, but also through the Motor Carrier Act of 1935 that supported distributors and kind of provided protection from large carriers to come in and overtake some of those regional routes. And so I was wondering, how do you that's very specific policy for the United States, and you're looking at a global system. And I'm wondering, there's a lot of different policies that are happening out there. I mean, I don't even know what Canada's done around concentration in the food system. So, have you thought about trying to map some of the policy issues into the system?
Oh, that's a really good thought. I mean, first we'll have to identify all the policies. I
Right.
remember more recently there was some conversation in the Canadian space as well with prices going up. But as Lauren mentioned, those happens like when there's a shock. It's a sudden response to a recent shock, a small short-term thing that happens. But no, I don't think I have a very good answer for that. I haven't come across any. There's some policy mapping work that people do to identify what's happening. But
Yeah.
are you saying that we try and model it to try and see,
I think it would be
or
interesting, especially in the digital twins example, where you could say, okay, what happens if we reintroduce the Motor Carrier Act of 1935? What happens in the United States? How does that change distribution? And same thing with, any other country. I mean, what would happen if it'd be a kind of a just a positive disruption, maybe is what I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking of. How can we
Mm-hmm.
positively change the system through policy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be really cool. But I'll have to think more about like how, yeah,
Yeah, I'm not
the
sure if I've seen that
transparency.
ever before.
Yeah, no. The
Uh,
transparency part is there. You can make it more transparent and
mhm,
find the middle actors and some distribution, but also on the companies, I'm sure like the trade work SEI is doing in trades where they identify specific uh, organizations or like private companies that are moving most of this,
mhm.
are responsible for
I
the
mean, and
distribution
the
part of it.
information is also, you talked about proprietary information and all the data coming out of the individual companies. We've got our federal data, but we also got transfer data you have to pay for that models with that proprietary data. And for fruits and vegetables, that's critical because the federal data is just insufficient.
Yeah, probably the first policy would be really cool to do is make all this proprietary data open source.
Yeah.
If there's a federal policy or a government policy that pushes governments, companies to do that, I mean, we'll get so many more insights. I feel like we just get a very first layer of it, um, than what is actually possible to do. It's not like the data doesn't exist. That's the bigger thing. Because people are
Yeah.
using the data for other purposes, right? Marketing
Right.
all the time, other things. So it's there.
Hmm.
If they're saying food security is it's a national security issue and you want to do it, I mean, maybe we need a advocacy group for instead of just private companies advocating for.
Sandy, you have a question.
Um,
Sandy, your hand is
Yes,
raised? Yeah.
yes, yes, absolutely. I do. Yes, absolutely. Well, Kushank, thank you so much. It's wonderful work. Congratulations. It turned out that my group and I have been doing something similar for the US case. We've developed a data set of 77 million agri-food supply chain flows across the counties of the US. So it leads actually to one question. You seem to be focusing on a certain group of commodities, and you don't seem to be touching upon processed food. And it turned out that for the North American market, processed food is between 60 and 70% of the food that consumers end up, consuming. Is it eventually something you have in mind to be developing as you push this work further? What do you think?
that's a great question, Sandy, and I've been meaning to respond to you on another note as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so we sort of incorporated processed commodities in this global food twin, but then it was very rough cut, right? Like we just assume where the dominant ingredient in the processed commodity is produced, that's where the processed commodity is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basic assumption we've done.
Okay.
But like to be able to do it really well, we need to identify where these processing units are and how
Yeah.
those are distributed.
Yeah.
Some of the work, not this part, but like other things I've worked on is there's these matrix-based bilateral trade data approach where you can identify, trace back any processed into primary equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
So the soy example I was giving, you can then trace it back to primary equivalent, and then you can get some sense where the source of this prime processed commodity was.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do all of that in this project, but that's one way to do it at a
Mm-hmm.
global scale.
Okay.
At a more regional scale, I think that would be really good to, it's try to look into it in PC. There is some information on elevators, elevator capacities, and some processing units, but then you becomes easier to do it at a commodity level. You want to go super deep into it, identify those capacities and units and stuff. But at a global scale, it's the best I think is to be able to do it, trace back, process back to primary equivalent and do it that way.
I see. Okay.
But I don't know how you've done it. Have I
So
in
for us,
US
it turned out.
County?
So for us, it turned out that the Bureau of Transportation Statistics does have data which are on roughly 4 or 5 categories of processed food. But it's at the state level. So it took us nearly 4 years of statistical downscaling to bring that to the county level. But we have it now. Let me build on what you said earlier for just a last question, if you allow me, Kushank, please.
Please.
Do you have the capacity when you're looking at a flow, more especially flows going to places with a harbor, do you have the capacity to distinguish whether the final use will be a domestic use versus it's a flow that is at the end for export? Can you eventually distinguish those two type of flows? Because as you can imagine, that flow is sensitive to different elements. Is the demand domestic and from a border county or border state, or is the demand coming from a foreign country? And as a result, what's happening over there will have an effect which is quite different on that flow. Is that something that you can distinguish in a Canadian case?
In the Canadian case, I'm always envious of the data that you guys have in the US.
Well, we don't have commodity level. It's a kind of aggregated flows, but they do differentiate. They do distinguish indeed whether the flow is for domestic use or not. So, for instance, when you see the state of Illinois, where I'm located, selling corn to California, you can distinguish whether it's going to be used there versus going through Los Angeles harbor and then being shipped to China or elsewhere. Yeah, I was just curious as to whether the Canadian Statistical Office would offer that degree of granularity. Okay.
No, the best way to get some estimate is through the say produce associations.
Okay.
So they have some sense of like how much of their produce in a particular municipality or province is being exported, or how much it's being processed as like blueberries going into jam, for example. So they have those estimates and how much is going to domestic grocery stores, and that part is, but again, commodity level. If I haven't found anything
Okay.
from the at the like government level and
Okay,
information on that.
it might have to be proxied somehow. Okay, but anyway, either way, fantastic work. Congratulations, it's great. We need to touch base. There are a lot of great extensions to be done with respect to water use, CO2 emission associated to agriculture, health-related impact, and so on and so forth. So again, fantastic work. Congratulations.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think I don't know if my PhD is supposed to be part of my PhD work on the environmental footprint part as well, but then never got to it.
Are there any other questions from those of you who are on the call?
I just want, Michelle, just would like to thank Kushank. Thank you so much on behalf of Icicle for joining us. This was extremely good. So I know the protocols, Michelle will get a recording and post the summary on our website, Icicle website. Thank you again, Kushank.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions on the chat?
I'm just looking. I don't see any others. So if you put a question in the chat, please speak up. I'm just running through it, but I'm not seeing any others.
And just to say that more than happy to collaborate, and if anybody has ideas they want to use it or think through, it might be the data is useful, but the tool is not. We can always, I do a lot of work on thinking about how you can make these data products more useful. So if you have ideas or anything, please reach out. And more than happy to talk about it or see how we can design something that might be useful for your context.
That's exceptionally generous of you, Kushank. Quick question. Do you feel like do you need a couple of sentences to describe what you're doing at FAO these days?
Oh, yeah, sure. There's a lot happening at FAO. I do a lot of mobilization for them as well, like thinking about how do you convert a 150-page policy mapping document into an interactive dashboard that can be shared with a minister, for example, and you have 3 minutes to have a conversation and you want to showcase that information. How do you do it? So those are some things, but there's also a lot of work in India that I'm working on climate change and agriculture. So doing more integrated modeling, and then some work on emissions and agri-food systems and assessing consumption-based emissions. Yeah, lots of moving parts, but it's been a fun, good journey,
I was going to
good
say you've got
transition.
your work cut out for you. Things are just getting more and more disrupted every day.
Yeah, there's also some tools on my website if you want to have a look and see what is possible. And yeah, if anybody wants to just play around with any of that and have any feedback later on, just feel free to write to us. Well, yeah, would love to engage more.
Thank you. So we'll have a summary of Kushank's talk today, as well as a recording on our website and on the Icicle website as well. We thank you for joining us today, and be well. Maybe see you in May.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate that and all the questions as well. Thank you.